cynicism is definitely a form of cowardice. You are
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze Titans in both the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life and ultimately to your transition. Those Titans range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of state to other divergent thinkers who are out there dominating their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we are interviewing Ken Falke and Josh Goldberg. Now, I discovered Ken and Josh through their incredible book, Struggle Well, Thriving in the Aftermath of Trauma. And Ken, after leaving his bomb disposal unit in the Navy, became a serial entrepreneur and is now chairman of the board at the Boulder Crest Foundation. Josh, on the other hand, comes from the civilian world. After 10 years spent climbing the corporate ladder, Josh knew he needed to make a change. And Josh is now the executive director of the Boulder Crest Foundation and doing work that he says he wants to continue doing for the rest of his life. Now, both Ken and Josh spend their time on the Warrior Path program to take it nationwide while continuing to develop Struggle Well online training program. So how did Ken and Josh do all this? Listen and find out. All right. So I'm here with both Ken Falke and Josh Goldberg. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Carson. We're happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Carson.
You're welcome. So for people that aren't familiar with the two of you and what you're working on and what you do, give us the background.
So the background is that we run a program that's based on a program for transitioning veterans and veterans suffering with PTSD, depression, anxiety, called Warrior Path at two of our beautiful, what we call post-traumatic growth academies, one in south of Tucson, Arizona, and one here in Bluemont, Virginia, where Josh and I sit. And our goal is really, our big picture goal is really try to scale our workout and ultimately change the way the mental health community and leaders treat people who are going through tough times. And that's really, I think, the big picture of what we're doing.
Ken comes from this as a Master Chief, retired bomb disposal tech. I come from this from a very different environment, which is as a civilian. I spent 10 or 11 years in corporate America doing things and sort of getting to the point as I said, I get to the top of the ladder and realize it's against the wrong building and really started to struggle. And I crossed paths with veterans in that process. And so I think part of what we recognize is that veterans know a lot more about some of the ingredients and what it takes to actually effectively struggle well in their lives. And I think part of what we try to do is harness that training. And, Ken and I wrote a book a couple of years ago, 2018, called Struggle Well. And in part, we did that certainly to make our message accessible beyond our places, but also because we got asked time and time again by civilians who were struggling is, hey, I know you don't serve us, but how can you help my brother, father, wife, fill in the blank? And that, with COVID, as you might imagine, has grown leaps and bounds of what is true is that a lot of people in life don't really know how to navigate difficult times. And that's what we focus on, is how do you do that in a way that's true to yourself and you can handle the ups and downs.
And from both of your perspective, you talking about changing the mental health community and their approach. From your perspective, what do you see is the current approach that you're departing from?
Well, in traditional mental health care, what happens is struggling, we start from perspective, if you will. Somebody's struggling. They seek out care, if they seek out care, which is part of the problem, right? We know for a fact 50% of people who are in fact struggling will never seek out care for a variety of, but the ones that do seek out care and then get put into a system. The system is a diagnosis of something, PTSD, depression, anxiety, moral injury, military sexual trauma. You can list them all, right? It's just, and not that the meanings behind these labels aren't very important to get us to where, one label on you, we just start first problem. Once you get a label on you, it becomes very heavy to carry. So then you've got the EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprogramming. There's something called prolonged exposure, and there's something called cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So one of these three plans is supposed to work for you. So now that you're diagnosed, now that you got the treatment plan, you start your treatment. The next thing that happens is people start dropping out of treatment. So you start to look at these numbers of, okay, 50% kind of go. Another, 20, 30, 40% start to drop out. And when you really start to see success in these treatments, the numbers of people that it works for is very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to do is say, hey, listen, this is all wrong, primarily because normally nothing's wrong with anybody, just the fact that something's happened to us all of us. And because that's normal, then let's come up with a normal approach, a humanistic approach and a normal approach to help people that require a doctor, a diagnosis, an insurance payment, hospital is a tragedy might be.
And I think, the other thing, and there's a USC, I don't know if he's a professor, a PhD, Carl Castro, when he talks about this idea of like, we shouldn't do stuff that doesn't work. And, I've talked to Ken a lot about, his work in supporting DOD with the fight against IEDs. And it's like, why did DOD go outside of DOD? And it's like, because people were dying and things weren't working. And so it's like, okay, like we have a system. If we just look at, it doesn't matter if you look at civilians, veterans, the mix, the rest, it's like half of people don't seek mental health. Right. And then of the people who do, then lots drop out, and people, like 3% of people get meaningfully better. So you're like, okay, so the system's not serving 97% of people. That's problematic. And, then you got to really have the humility to understand why is that? And I think a part of it is there's an element where it probably feels like, I've been through the mental health system on the civilian side. It like feels like McDonald's. It's like we've made efficiency the goal. And it's like 7 sessions, 8 sessions. Kind of reminds me of like 7-minute apps or 6-minute apps. And this kind of idea of like, that's not how people work. And there's a great psychiatrist out in San Francisco named Jonathan Shedler who has done some really good work and some really good writing about like, that's not how change happens. And that's not how you meaningfully support people. And so I think the experience we hear for most people who come to us, who generally have tried some form of mental health, is I couldn't connect with my provider. And therefore, whether or not the thing actually works, it doesn't matter because they ain't going to sign up for it. And so a lot of people really quickly in how to do something, and we haven't in what to do, but we haven't trained them how to do it, which is to be a human and to connect with people. And that's hard, and it's challenging, and it's time consuming. And that's what we've had the benefit of doing here, is really get to hear and know people and address that. And so, hopefully for us, well, no, I would say hopefully, like we're going to work on this. I'll work on this the rest of my life. It's like, I think that because I think people die when they go into a system that tells them, hey, sorry about life, but the rest of your life's going to be a fraction of what it used to be. I hope you hang around for it. And it's like, why would you sign up? Like, who's going to sign up for like a lesser life for the rest of the time? Like, it's misery. It's absolute misery.
Yeah, I agree. And that's exactly what I have seen as well. But has there been any surprising development that you didn't necessarily anticipate when you started out that's developed as you've gone along?
We get surprises every day, I think. I want to go back and one thing I didn't say is that Josh kind of alluded to there at the end. But remember, in traditional mental health care, the whole purpose of it is to reduce your symptoms. Whereas the work we do is, you've read about in the book, is called post-traumatic growth, based on the science of Dr. Rich Tedeschi and Lauren Calhoun's work. We try to teach people how to thrive in their life, because living as a diminished version of yourself, because of this system, this medication, this talk therapy approach, what referred to as the evidence-based models, just doesn't allow you to thrive. It just allows you to kind of reduce these symptoms and be a lesser version of yourself. Surprises. So, whenever you take on a system, there's going to be lots of surprises when you're coming from the outside. And I think that's really what we've learned. the biggest disconnect. And by the way, the majority of the people who deliver mental health care are great people.
Yeah.
God bless the social worker, but it's a weird system, right? You got psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers, and that's the way they look kind of at each other in some respects. Psychiatrists feel they're the best, psychologists second best, social workers the third, and God. So the bigger disconnect in the system is that you've got policymakers and academics who, in fact, are making major decisions for people like us, you and me and our daughter and whoever's seeking out mental health care, and they've never seen a patient, or they haven't seen a patient in 20 or 25 years. And that, to me, is brutal. And I tell everybody, like Josh mentioned, I was a bomb disposal guy in the Navy. And I just think about how that approach would work if bomb disposal people weren't making decisions. And it's like, how can you send me some procedure down from Capitol Hill or from the American Psychological Association, and tell me how to do my job when you're not there on the ground with this thing that might blow up in my face. And that to me is a brutal decision that causes problems. But the biggest problem that it's caused us is that there's no rationalizing, right? It's like you find this group of people that they feel like they're true scientists, which we all know social science is much different than traditional scientific approaches. They feel like they're real scientists. They make these hardcore decisions that this is the way it's got to be done. Yeah. This is evidence-based. And if it doesn't work this way, it's never going to work. And then bang, we show up. Our program's 3 to 5 times as effective when you look at data, 3 to 5 times as effective as traditional evidence-based care. But when we ask them how do we become evidence-based, they all go, "Oh, I don't know. That's not what we do.
Can't measure what you do.
We can't measure what you do." The head of research and development for PTSD at the VA told us that they don't believe that they can measure what we do.
And they can't keep up with our pace of innovation. I think, so that's one
I'm both
side
surprised and not surprised at the same time.
So I'll take that from a slightly different angle. In terms of what surprised, and I think there's this sense, especially with veterans, that they don't want to talk about hard stuff. And I'm a civilian, right? And I would tell you that I don't think that's true, is that if they trust you, if they feel as though you are willing to lead from the front and do what you said you would do, and also you seem healthy, which is like, if you're looking at somebody and they see in your eyes and they're like, that person's more jacked up than I am, listen, they can't, how are you going to get somebody to replace you? Is they are incredibly willing to talk about incredibly hard stuff as part of a commitment to figuring out whatever it's going to take to live a better life. And I think that piece to me it's almost like, by no means do I think veterans are victims, but it's like victim blaming. It's like, we couldn't get them to talk. It must be their fault. And it's like, that's how I feel, being blunt on this day, is like the system blames, you have who's doing it, what they're doing, and who they're doing it to, and the person who they're doing it to gets blamed. They get called treatment resistant. Maybe we need to look at the treatment and not the person. And I think that's the part for me that, like, if I hadn't had a little bit more fight in me when I got diagnosed with whatever severe depression, it would have been like, you just quit. And I'm like, I don't believe this shit. I'm like, I got way too much stuff in life that I don't know how to deal with. And I need, and that's why people turn to coaches in a lot of respect, because it's a different mentality of, hey, here's where I want to get to. And then the coach helps you deal with the things that inhibit your ability to do that, versus being like, what's wrong with you? Let's talk about that ad infinitum forever. And then you get people who are like, I don't want to talk about the guy I lost anymore. Like, that happened. I want to talk about how do I move forward and honor that person. Can you help me do that? And that's why, like, for us, it's like purpose, direction, the future is where people want to go. And it's like, how do you figure out how to help people get there, not wallow in their trauma? It's just nothing good happening.
I agree. And one of the things that I think a lot of veterans that I've talked to have been struggling with is what they call the bullshitters, which I would call, questionable subject matter experts. So and I know you all talk about this in your book, what would you recommend to veterans, or how do they piece out when somebody's a good subject matter expert versus when they're just blowing smoke?
In mental health terms?
In mental health terms, or in general terms, because there's a lot of people masquerading, saying things, and it's very hard to decipher if you're not tuned in.
Yeah. It's a shame, the other thing that drives me crazy in the veteran community is that it's become a space, the veteran space.
Yeah.
What space means normally in this lingo is a business model. There's a lot of people, nonprofits included, there's a lot of people getting rich off of veterans, right? I mean, it's like, so they can see through that in veterans. Because we've been there, we've done it, we've seen the worst that humanity has to offer, and then you come back and you have to listen to somebody, trying to pull the wool over your eyes. It just doesn't work. We know it, right? I mean, we pull the wool over each other's eyes our whole career, and we become very good at seeing through this stuff. So it's the one thing I'll say, we talk about mental health specifically, is if you find a connection with a therapist, stick to it. But if you don't find a connection with a therapist, you have the right to go find another one. And a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people think once the VA or whoever assigns you a therapist, that's it. But that's not it. You can go through 20 therapists before you maybe find the right one. I think, well, we've said it jokingly before, and at this point in time, I don't think it's a joke anymore, but we could probably teach a whole class on how to find a good therapist. The best ones are former military normally, because they understand it. The next best ones normally, which some people might, call bullshit on me or call ironic, but the next best ones we believe are at the VA, because the VA definitely has a good understanding of us. And then you have these cats and dogs outside the system that just do very, very good work, and they don't, just because they weren't a veteran, doesn't necessarily mean they can't help us. And that's what we've found. But in general terms in life, I mean, it's no different than a used car salesman, right? I mean, whatever you walk into, you just got to ask those questions. Is this person being honest? And veterans just have a great bullshit meter. I mean, as soon as the thing starts to peg red, walk away.
And what I would say, I mean, I can't comment to like all the subjects, right? Like the problem with social media, everybody's an expert. Everyone has a freaking soapbox. But what I would say to you as it relates to the core issues with folks we see, which is some of it's transition. Like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want to do. Or it's more mental health stuff. Is these things are not new. They're not new challenges. They're not new struggles. They're like, ever since humans have existed, struggle and trauma has existed. And so, on our website, we put up some books that we recommend, and these are time-tested things. There's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. There's a Holocaust survivor. You have Joseph Campbell, who writes amazing things about this hero's journey that is really the narrative arc of our lives. Is some of these things, the guys from the Hanoi Hilton, it's like there are people, I don't know. I tend to enjoy idolizing people who are dead because they can't disappoint you and be, have tweets that come out that are surprising. But it's like, I think what I would say in this world is, I mean, this is like the question of like existential philosophy, and all of these people have been trying to answer for a long time. And so if it's a quick fix, if it sounds too good to be true, and some of this stuff, it's like, people talk about getting a sustainable approach for your life. Does that meaningfully allow you to live a good life on your own 2 feet? I think the question is debatable. So that's what I would say. It's like, we've been sold this bill of goods as a society, not to get again on like a high horse, is like of efficiency being the paradigm for everything. Yeah. And as I was taught by my military people, as someone goes fast, is that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? It's like this stuff takes time to walk through, but it's like a universal journey. And so, I think the people who have stood the test of time, there's a lot to be said for that.
Well, yeah, Viktor Frankl is definitely one that comes up in most conversations. Now, if we could switch gears for a second, and I want to look at this from the perspective of maybe I'm a veteran and I'm watching one of my buddies who's in, kind of the muck, but I don't really know how to approach it. What type of advice would you give somebody who's in that situation?
Well, it's interesting enough. I had a message from a friend on Facebook today. A friend of his, I don't know, this guy is struggling, as we all know. I mean, COVID's been brutal anyway, but the holiday periods are normally a little tougher than others. And this guy's, struggling, and he asked me the same question. He said, what can I do to help? And I said, be there and listen. I mean, that's the first step to this, is need. And you can sit down with them and do nothing more than listen, and let them talk it through. Sometimes they'll come to their own conclusions, and that's normally what happens in a good listening and chatting session. Be careful in giving advice. What worked for you may not work for them. All right, maybe you have a therapy dog and this person's allergic to dogs. It's not going to work. So you got to be real careful in giving advice that may not work for, that worked for you but may not work for somebody else. That can be very dangerous. Be careful in pushing them off to a system, right? Really quickly. I think that's a big thing. I always tell people, I believe PTSD is as much of if not more of a leadership issue than it is a mental health issue. And what I mean by that is that we, as leaders, when our people bring us problems, that's when leadership should happen, right? Because leadership's a verb, and it should be interactive, and we should be working with our people. But what leaders do when somebody comes to them and have some sort of a mental health issue is they go to the chaplain, go to the doc, get away from me.
Go to the wizard.
Go to the wizard. The Marine Corps said, go see. Well, I seen what's behind the curtain. And you just, give the person the high five, the Heisman high five here, and just say, go to medical or go to the chaplain's office. You may be doing a lot more damage than you could have by just sitting down and saying, hey, let's talk about it. Tell me what's going on. And those are the things that I believe are the best starting points.
Yeah, and I just echo, I think that there's a quote from a guy named Carl Buhner. Sometimes people say it's Maya Angelou, but it's not. And he said, people will forget what you said and they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And, the deepest needs of a human being are to feel seen, heard, and valued. That's what all human beings need. And I think when someone's struggling, they generally don't feel very valuable or valued. And part of how you make someone feel valued is to deeply listen to them so that you can understand them, not to convince them what they should do or how they should be, but just to actually listen. I mean, it is so striking. It's like, if you ask somebody, so let's say you got a buddy and you're worried about it, and just look at them, be like, how are you? Right. And the first answer is going to be, good, fine, that sort of stuff. And then just look at them again and say, how are you really? And they'll tell you if they believe you care, and the opportunity for them to be able to let go of some of that stuff. Yeah. It's not going to solve everything, but it allows them to understand that there are who care and that there's meaning in that. And I think, that's like this Suicide Prevention Foundation. They're like, the single closest thing to a silver bullet is that somebody actually listens. They don't try to say don't do it, or here are all the reasons you should live. They just listen to somebody. Is striking to me that, and that's where we can all do that. To be clear, we can all do that. But what happens is someone says, hey, I'm struggling, or I'm thinking of killing myself, or I have, my roof of my mouth is torn up. And then we get scared. And then we're like, oh shit, you need to talk to somebody, which is a great way to make someone who doesn't feel good or feels broken, feel broken, is for you to be like, hey, you exceed my level of care and capabilities. So you need to go talk to some random ass person you've never met in a system that you don't understand. And that's incredibly intimidating. And I think that's the part to me of we have to be, one of our favorite stories is from the prisoners of war at the Hanoi Hilton. 591 men came home in 1973. The doctors and psychologists feared for the worst. And the foreword to our book is written by Charlie Plum, who was there for 2,103 days. And these men came home, and despite 2.5 years to 8.5 years, 2.5 months to 8.5 years of captivity, torture, isolation, all the rest of that good stuff, only 4% of them came home struggling, and 80% of them were better off when they got back. And so I think what you realize is they didn't have a mental health person there. Right? Their core motto was, we are brothers and sisters keeper. And they knew that because people got tortured and they broke, and they knew that there was shame, that what they required each other to do was to disclose. They would say, get on the wall and talk about what you did and what happened in the moments in your life when you were as strong as you wanted it to be. And I think that where it's like, oh, if it's mental health related, we outsource it to those people. And I think in a society with a 30-year high suicide rate pre-COVID, lots of despair, opioid overdoses that are going back up again, it's like the clear message is we're in a really bad way, and there aren't enough, like, we're the ones who are going to save ourselves, and we're the ones we're looking for, because there ain't enough mental health professionals to do that. And I know I'm going for a while, but let me just say the last thing. We have a good friend, Vikram Patel. He's a psychiatrist. Vikram is a psychiatrist from India, and he was forced to, in India, 5,000 mental health professionals from more than 1 billion people, to really rely on regular people to support other people who were struggling. And it was dramatically more effective than traditional treatment. And that's the stuff where we say, like, hey, we've got to look at this stuff. Like, the idea that anyone has a monopoly on helping people is ridiculous, because the barriers to entry often override any value of those people. So that's the stuff we have to look at. And I think as human beings, I think as leaders, we have to feel a level of confidence that when someone does come to us, not only that we exude a sense of, like, hey, if someone's struggling and come to us, but also that we can handle it at some level. We don't need to be doctors, but we don't need to read the DSM, but we need to at least be fluent in, like, being human and connecting.
Right. So you touched on something that I know you also touch on in your book, and I'd love to have you all explain it here. You talked about shame just a little bit, and you say that shame leads to disconnect, and the disconnect is basically where everything falls apart. At least that was my interpretation. What is it about that shame that's causing that disconnect, and what are those impacts long term?
Well, imagine the story of, a story of a child who, has a rough life all their life, and as humans, we become his mother getting beaten maybe by her husband, and ultimately a divorce, and maybe the mother turns into a drug addict, and all these things that just kind of start happening, and all that stuff, in a military analogy, kind of goes into your rucksack. These are rocks that you just can't easily shed. You're carrying them for your life, right? And all of a sudden, this rucksack, in military terms, becomes 100 pounds. And even the biggest, toughest guys, can't carry a 100-pound rucksack very far. And all of a sudden, you have to stop and take it off and start to get rid of some of this stuff. And a lot of it is, in fact, shame. You're ashamed you behaved, you're ashamed of the way your mother behaved, your father behaved, and all this shame and shame and shame just kind of keeps going. So one of the things that we work on is dumping that out. And back to Josh's story of the Hanoi Hilton and these prisoners of war, is that they were ashamed by the fact that during torture they broke, and they told people more than what the Geneva Convention told them to tell them, which was name, rank, and social security number, or military ID number, whatever it was at the time. And they told them things. They told them about, they were asked questions about how many airplanes were on the aircraft carrier, and they'd tell them that was classified information. How many bombs could a plane carry? What kind of bombs are they? And under torture and under pressure, many of these men told more than they wanted to. And it was okay. And the reason they were okay from it was because they talked about it. And that's really what we believe, is that once you start to dump this shame and these rocks out of your rucksack, then it gives us this like fresh opportunity to start. And remembering that no matter who we are as humans, and this is one of my biggest frustrations with things like prolonged exposure, is no matter what happened yesterday, the day before, or 10 years ago, we can't change it. You just cannot. You can't change what happened a minute ago, let alone a day or 20 years ago. But what you can do is figure out how to create the new story in your life and not become a victimized by all this stuff that carried with us, which is normally shame and guilt. And on the other side of shame is, in fact, guilt. And those are normally things that we do to ourselves that we're guilty of. And, those things equally weigh as hard and as heavy. So once it's spoken, once the rucksack's emptied, once other people have been exposed to it, what we call disclosure in the science of post-traumatic growth, it's the disclosure phase, getting it off of our chest. And you don't have to tell, a front page, ad in the Washington Post to rid this. You just need to sit down with a couple of friends and just say, hey, something's bothering me, and I got to get it off my chest. And just by the out speak of it, it tends to definitely be minimized.
And I think at the core of that, right? I mean, shame is this idea that like I'm bad, right, or I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And so it comes with a lot of judgment of ourselves, and then judgment of what we perceive for other people. And we have this thought that if only people knew us, they would not accept us, they would not love us, they would not be willing to kill. We would not be worthy of connection with other people, right? So the reason why it's fundamentally isolating is because the difference between people who have love and connection and those who don't is they think they're worthy of that. And Brene Brown's done lots of really good work in this area and talked about that stuff. And there's a great story from the Hanoi Hilton of a guy named Stafford who, after, they spent long periods of time in isolation, and whether it was solitary confinement or just in the cells by themselves, and he finally gets put into a cell with two other guys. And he, hasn't slept, and he's suicidal. And he finally is just like, I got to do this. And he says, guys, I have to confess something. He said, when I was tortured, when I was on the ropes, I broke. And I gave him more than I was supposed to. And it was this deafening silence for him. And then they looked at him and they said, join the fucking club. And then it says it was the first night he slept soundly in forever. And the idea is that we have this sense of ourselves that somehow what we've done is uniquely disqualifying for human connection and relationship. And we all make mistakes. We all do things that we shouldn't do. We all at times act in a way that's not in accordance with what our values are or how we perceive ourselves. And we have to have people in our lives that we can share that with. I mean, we believe you're the average of the 3 to 5 people you spend the most time with. I feel good about the people in my life that include people like Ken, is that there's nothing I could do that I don't have someone I could pick up the phone and be like, you won't believe what I did, but I did this, I said this. And where those people will provide support, but also accountability. You have to have those people in your life. And for some people, and this is really important, that is a mental health person, right? That's a coach. And that is a useful thing to have in your life. And I think one thing we'd say is we are critical and honest. We want to change the system. And, for a lot of people, that is their best option and it is effective. And we don't want to discourage people or give people second doubts or doubts about that. It's like, hey, do what works. As Ken said, everyone's different. Do what works for you. Just know that you can't hold that shit. The expression is you're only as stuck as your secrets. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I grew up as a Catholic, and, we call it confession on Saturday nights, right? It's getting it off your chest, and the priest is there, and it's kind of a darkened little room that you sit in and tell the tales, right?
Yeah, it's very ceremonial. So that you talk about the story, right? Rewriting your story and changing your story. How have you seen people's stories change from when they start versus when they kind of accept this new paradigm?
So, in the subject, in the transformation of post-traumatic growth, kind of there's 5
domains.
Domains, we'll call them. I was going to say phases, but every time I say phases, Tedeschi says to me, they're not mechanistic.
Oh, yeah.
And, step by step, but it can easily be looked at it. But the first phase of post-traumatic growth is education. Now that education process is ongoing as well throughout the whole, human existence and human life. Is that we're always trying to become a better version. I mean, if I had to summarize what life should be about for most people, it's kind of gaining your wisdom and trying to be a great person in life. And your life should look something like that. We should always get a little bit smarter and always become a little bit better of a person. And it kind of boils down to those kind of simplistic things. And if you think about education, that it's ongoing through our whole lives to get there. So education first. The next step is what we refer to as regulation, this ability to regulate our emotions and our stress. So when stress comes upon us, how do we best regulate that so we don't explode, or what we would call in our book, we talk about a reaction, and we mention reaction in a negative context because normally that's, kind of flying off the handle. You're doing things too quickly without thinking them through. Regulation techniques include things like breathing and meditation and exercise. But this ability to self-regulate is really important. The most successful people in the world are very self-aware, and self-awareness and self-regulation are kind of synonymous, is that we can bring ourselves down to a good place without having inject things from the outside. We also have a saying that if you can't self-regulate, you'll self-medicate, and we all know how bad that goes. After that is disclosure, which we just talked about, getting the shame and guilt off of our bodies, out of our system. And then the next thing is creating this new story. So imagine, a life, and a friend of mine, has a saying, every day, he has a saying that today is the first day of the rest of our lives. And how cool is that we are, as humans, able to start over daily.
Mm-hmm.
Screw up a little bit today, I'm going to do it again tomorrow, or whatever it might be. But imagine, and the analogy I give in the book is, I love cars, and I give this analogy of having this, beautiful red Ferrari, and the concept of driving that Ferrari and looking in your rearview mirror and going 10 miles an hour. And really, that's the past, right? I'm looking at the past, I'm thinking, wow, what did I do? It's holding me back. This car goes 200 miles an hour, but I'm only going 10. What's happening? And really, if you think about it, that's depression. The past holds us back, that we get stuck. But the truth about driving that Ferrari is this simple. I have to understand that car. I need to live in the present. I need to understand the gauges, where the gas pedal, where the clutch is, where the paddle shifters are, how much air pressure I've got in my tires, how much oil pressure I've got, how much gas I've got, how fast I'm going, where my tack is so I can shift on time. But I need to learn how to live in the present. But I also need to be able to plan and create this new story for my future, because that windshield's big, right? It's 3 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And if I put my foot down, I can go really fast. And as any good driving course will teach you, is even though you're driving really fast going forward, you still need to look in these mirrors. Look on the side, because if you're shifting lanes, you want to know what's on the left or the right. If there's red lights coming up behind you because you're going 200 miles an hour, you want to know that. So it's okay to look back. It's okay to reflect on these things that have happened, but you can't get stuck there. So the secret, we believe the secret in life at this phase of post-traumatic growth, is to say, okay, the past is the past. I got it. I've been kicked in the teeth. It hurt like a son of a bitch, but I'm going to move forward. And here's how I'm going to move forward. I'm going to set a variety of goals. I know at some time in this life I'm going to die. And between today and between that day of death, I'm going to live the life that I believe that I was put on this earth to live. And that's the new story. And how you write that, who you write it with, all those things are up to you. But the great thing is we can do it. And that's really what we try to focus on with people that come through our programs, is really getting them out of this stuckness, getting the shame and guilt off their shoulders, teaching them ways to self-regulate, but really getting them to a place where they can just drive forward with meaning and purpose. And that really keeps people out of the slumps.
I think, when we think about story is, I tend to think that the most interesting lives have lots of different chapters, and, I have my resume is like, I worked at Big Tobacco, Big Oil, and now I do this. And it was like, so there's this like, what was the quantum leap here, right? So it's like, you have these interesting experiences where you have, and I look at Ken, and it's like, you're a hockey player, you're in the Navy, you're an entrepreneur, you're a philanthropist, a grandfather, like you have these kind of ways in which you continue to evolve and grow, and there are through lines. But it's, what is clear when we talk about the topic of transition is that, and the research is really good, is people in the military have a very high job affiliation, which means the extent to which they derive the sense of identity is very, like 90+% from their job. But the thing is, the military is not a job. It's a vocation. It's a mission. There is a lot happening in the military. You understand who you are. You understand why you exist, where you belong. There's a lot of all of these things at once. And so, you get out, and it's like when you take the uniform off, you forget everything you learn. And Ken talks about the Navy making him the man he is. Most people, and we have another friend who used to tell Marines at boot camp, don't let the Marine Corps be the last greatest accomplishment of your life. Now, for these Marines, it was like, well, what the hell is the guy talking about? We just got our, globe and anchor. But his point was, like, life doesn't stop when your career ends if it's 4 or 40. And so, but the challenge is a lot of people do feel that way. And it's like, and all it is this yearning for what was, and this sense of, and it's grief. It's like, for all the loss and the things I can't do. And so when we think about the new story, it's a renewed sense of like, what I experienced was a launching pad to a next chapter of my life. That is going to, by definition, have to be more dynamic, because you are highly unlikely to find work that provides you with not just food, money for your, for your house and all the rest of your needs, but also like all these other features that the military offers. And I know there's downsides in the military, but you don't find that at most workplaces. I mean, I worked at big companies. There's a lot of people who are doing mercenary work there. And so when we think about story, is this sense of like, whether people find it or they simply get the recognition, like there's something good out there. And it's my job to find it. And it's a much different perspective about what that looks like. And I think that's the stories we see is I do have value. I don't need to wear a uniform to be of service. And that there's a lot of good in my life that is worth investing in and spending time in. And I think, we've seen really cool transformations and really cool choices that people have made. And we've seen, we just did a social impact study on our participants. It's the average Warrior Path graduate positively impacts 500 people. Right? It's crazy. So our programs are 6 to 8 people, but those 8 people affect 4,000. How many of those 4,000 affect, and yada, yada. So it's like that idea of like, you forgot who you were. And that's one of the things I think about, like Dusty's our executive director here, is 82nd Airborne, big, tough guy. And I remember him looking at a guy and he's like, when did you forget who you were? You're a warrior, right? You will always be a warrior. And the shoulders come back and the bearing returns.
Yeah.
Because struggle tramples our confidence. That's what it ruptures. We lose our mojo. We don't think we're worth anything. We don't think we're capable of anything. And it's like, I know what that's like, and you play scared and you live scared. And it's like, and you can't live from that place, especially people who like ran at machine gun fire, which is not something that, I don't like. I caught a mouse the other day. I don't like that shit. Like, I was like, I'm not y'all. And so but you can't live from a fear-based place, and it's crippling. But a lot of what PTSD and anxiety is about is you're so afraid it's like paralyzing, and breaking the grip of that and being able to see clearly again of like, like Charlie Plum said to Hanoi Hilton, it's the 8 inches, right? It's not the cell. We lock ourselves in prison cells. They were in a prison, but they were free in many respects. So.
And you talked about some of the cool transformations. Can you give examples of some of the transformations you've seen of like what those cool choices have entailed? Because you also talked about having a variety of goals.
Yeah. So you mean specific to people who have come through our program, Carson? Or?
Yeah. Can you give an example without,
I mean, we could probably give you 20 examples at least of guys and gals who have come through Warrior Path, suicidal, massive amounts of medication, frustrated as hell with the system that they've been stuck in, and left here a week later, told the therapist goodbye, or maybe even stayed with their therapist to explain what was wrong. We had a therapist call us one time and said, "What'd you do to my patient?"
In a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
But they, leave their medications. They'll go sit down with the doctor. We try to give them that agency back, that ability to go make these hard decisions and sit down with the doctor and say, "Hey, listen, yes, my heart's not ticking right. I need blood pressure medication, but this, and this just don't seem to be doing. I don't think I need them anymore." Try to get people off all these horrible medications. And that's the other thing in the psychiatric approach. Half of these medications for depression and anxiety have suicide as a side effect. I'm the rocket science, I was a bomb disposal guy, but that in itself blows my damn mind. But out of the first 20 that I'm going to give you an example of, they've gone on to start their own businesses, to start their own nonprofits, to kind of proselytize the work that we're doing here to their kind of communities. We had an NFL football player come through our program, rookie of the year, running back, fullback, and a friend of ours said he was struggling. And I said, send him to our program. We'll give him a seat. The military guys normally look up to the NFL guys as heroes, and the NFL guys normally look up to the military guys as heroes. Let's see how it works. Anyway, this guy comes in and I 4 years ago, and I just spent the weekend with him last weekend, and he lives down in Dallas, Texas. He's working with these inner city schools, trying to help these kids get better STEM education. And this is a guy who came to us who was suicidal, and And that story just goes over and over and over again. And it's not just guys, it's women as well. We run an all male and an all female program. Marriage, lots of marriage enrichment, lots of people that realize that the marriage that they're in isn't good, and they go get divorced, and they get their 3 to 5 networks built up. But lots of success all around, and not always success. We've had a couple people that just haven't done well, but our program's not for everybody. And that's the one thing that I think is really important to understand, is that I tell people all the time, there's about 3 categories, maybe 4, but about 3 categories of people that our program and our philosophy won't work well for. The first one are people with severe psychiatric disorders, things like schizophrenia, severe bipolarness, borderline personalities, things where you just don't know who you are or how to get any better. We're not psychologists. It's a peer-based program. So if you need that level of care and inpatient care, this isn't the place for you. The second group that we don't do very well with are addicts, people that are actively using a lot, specifically a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, whether they're prescription or illegal drugs. Our program doesn't work well because we don't have the time and space to detox in our program, and that's just not a good outcome for us if we get somebody here who's an addict. The third person, and one of the reasons, Carson, I was so impressed with your podcast. I saw your piece you did on LinkedIn about the victim veteran. And I call those folks professional wounded warriors. And our program doesn't work well for them. If you're going to spend the rest of your life, taking advantage of, this free trip, that free trip, this free thing, that free thing, you might as well just add yourself to the list of victims and write your warriorism off in my book, right? And it's the easy way out. And some people say, well, how do you root them out? Well, we have a question on our assessment that says, well, how many programs have you been to? And if I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. We've had people say 26, 35. A friend of mine from Wounded Warrior Project told me they had somebody who had answered the same question and had been on 80 some different trips. So we'll say to them, okay, you've been on 25, different types of therapeutic trips. What do you hope to get out of this? And if the answer is, well, dude, I've been home for 3 weeks from that last trip and my wife's getting on my nerves, then we know that our program's not going to work for them because they're just looking to get away and looking for a free trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains or Southern Arizona. But if the answer is, hey, listen, you're right, I've been to 26 trips, and every damn one of them, every time I get home, I just feel as bad as I did before. And I've heard great things about Warrior Path, then we'll bring them here in hopes that they are successful. Because our program's not what we call a catch and release program where you go fishing and then go back to your normal life. This program lasts 18 months. 7 days is with us physically. 18 months where you have assignments and work to do to create, to help you create your new story. And that's hard. Hard work.
So I know we're running out of time, and I know you all have a hard stop. So this will be the last one I get from you. But if each of you had a magic wand and you could just implant in the brain of ambitious veterans that are out there, specifically ambitious post 9/11 veterans, what would be your piece of information that you would implant for them?
It's funny because I was just, I don't know why I was thinking this, there's a quote that, I made major changes in my life, right? And I was doing this whole life and I had a lot betted on that. I was married, all these things, and, a lot of difficult decisions, and really walk away from everything that I had created to go create a new life. And that, as I said earlier, it comes with a lot of fear and a lot of doubt, a lot of self-doubt. And there was a quote that I came across that is actually from like a Native American initiation that Joseph Campbell kind of is the quoter. And he said that as you go the way of life, you will see a great chasm, right? A great gap, kind of this space between rocks that are high up. And he said, jump. It's never as wide as you think. And, I feel like it's the same thing they always talk about with every freaking SEAL book where they got to write about buds, right? But McRaven talks about this idea is like that the fear that we possess is always greater than what is required or appropriate. And so there is that sense of being able to navigate and not, and to come back to it is just not to allow that fear to guide you. I think that's part one. And I think that if I can get a 2-part answer, is, there's something profound as a civilian. There's something deeply profound about the experience of being an honorary member in a community where people walk into a room and they can see other people like them, right? Where it is a wordless culture, where you understand each other at a deeper level, and maintaining that connection in some way, shape, or form is critical. Whatever your military experience is if you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you don't stay somehow connected to people who have your same jacked up black sense of humor and the rest of it is, you probably will struggle some, because as a civilian, right, we're pains in the asses. We're all about a bad barista away from losing our minds. And so I think there has to be a mechanism where being connected to people who have a shared experience to you and finding those in a positive way, which you talk about, is making sure those are not the, screw all civilians and all that kind of crowd, but are people who are generally like supporting each other. And there are good groups that do that. And whether it's, red, white, and blue or others, is how do you stay connected to a community that represents a really meaningful and important part of your life and not feel like you have to hate what you once loved in order to not be a part of it? Is that's always going to be a part of who you are, and that will make you successful. And I see it not just every day. I see the effect it has on other people to make me focus on getting shit done and using less of this and more of all the other things I have, because you create a culture of accountability around you. And I think understanding that influence and impact is important.
Yeah. I think, you guys are talking about each person's impacting 500 people. And I agree. Those are very profound. So what would be your piece of advice, Ken?
Well, I mean, Carson, it's a great question. The problem is the answer is complicated because there's no that, and this is
good.
This is what we've learned, right? There is no silver bullet for success. There's no silver bullet for putting any of this behind us. I go back to there's a friend of mine, a retired 2-star Marine general, who used to say to all his Marines, "Don't let the Marine Corps be the last great thing you do." Now, if you weren't a Marine, don't let the Navy or the Army or the Air Force or the Space Force or the Coast Guard be the last great thing you do. Right? I had a great job in the Navy. I was a halo jumper. I was a diver. I was blowing crap up. I will never be able to replace the fun work that I had. But the service element of what I served in the military for, I can surely continue to serve outside. And you don't have to go start your own nonprofit. You don't have to work at a nonprofit. What you need to do is help the people in your community that are suffering. So don't let the military be the last great thing you do. The second thing is, don't lose your military bearing. And I'm not talking about grow your hair out, grow your beard out, get an earring, but Jesus, don't fall into this victimhood of this country. I mean, we have enough damn victims that we have to take care of. Be the man or the woman the military trained you to be, which was not to have to rely on a system, but to rely on the people that are to the left and to the right of you, and to be a good citizen, which means getting up in the morning and having a job, following the laws of this country, paying your taxes, and being a good citizen. And if you do that, life becomes a lot easier. If you don't do it, right, as John Wayne used to say, right, if you're going to be dumb, you better be strong. It's like this life is very difficult if you're dumb. And for the most part, we don't produce dummies out of the military. We do a damn good job of transforming civilians into these remarkable soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen. We do a terrible job of making them civilians again. A terrible job. And everybody, even the people in charge of the TAP program, understand it. And we still can't get the 2 or 3 extra weeks that we need to help people transition. If you need help, there's plenty of it out here. But don't become a victim. And last but not least, know this: life is not hard. It's just hard work. And if you set goals and create your news story about where you want to be, you'll get there. I am the product. I come from a family of coal miners. I had nothing. My dad left the Army as an E4 and became a cop in Washington, D.C. We had nothing. My mom died when I was 7 years old. I had no mom. Then my dad remarried again. My dad ended up doing pretty well. He started his own construction company because he couldn't become a cop anymore. I joined the Navy after a failed career in ice hockey. I wanted to play professional hockey. It didn't work. So I joined the Navy as an E1. I retired as an E9. I left the Navy. I started a company. That company grew and sold for millions and millions of dollars. I had 13 business partners when we sold the company. 11 of them were multimillionaires, beside me and my wife having huge success. This country is full of opportunities. If you become a victim, you will never achieve it. And we've taught you right and well in the military. If you turn that into planning and progress and working hard, the hard work that you did in the military, if you continue that in your civilian career, you will succeed. I guarantee it. But it's not easy. It's hard work, and that's really our message. Is that if you're looking for the silver bullet, you think a dog's going to solve your problems, or a weighted blanket, or a pill. If you think that shit's going to solve your problems, it ain't. You've got to do the hard work that goes in behind it. All that stuff may supplement some of your trauma, but it's not going to solve your problems. So that's it. That's my message, and thanks for sharing it, Carson.
Yeah, and I have a nickname, Carson. It's one more thing. So I want to say something I think about what Ken just said, and I think people know is I admire him deeply, and I think I'd say two-part thing. One is, so Ken talks about that success, and then went on to found a nonprofit and spends all his time as like a paid volunteer, meaning he pays to volunteer here, and does that, right? And I think that is the essence of something he described the other day that a financial planner said, that his job is to help people not fall into two traps. One is greed and one is fear, right? And I talked about fear, and I think that notion that service never stops is amazing. And I think the other part is like find really good role models, whether they're alive or dead, whether you read their memoirs, or people like Ken, which I'm blessed to have, is like follow, like find people who have lives you want, who have principles you want, and study them and understand them. And that's what, like, I think, people look at Ken. I mean, this is amazing role models of what it means to be a veteran who leverages your training and career. And I just think it's an amazing thing. And there's tons of stories. And that's the other piece. Like, yeah, there's a lot of veterans struggling, but there's a lot more who are crushing it. And we just have to, and that's not just, there's no shame in that. It's normal to struggle, but just saying, like, we have to remember that, like, you guys succeed and start businesses and do other things at rates that civilians don't, because you're less afraid. It's the bottom line. Yeah, my story's not unique. That's for sure.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Carson.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.